the messaging from big meat production companies is the biggest scandal that's occurring right now. If you're proud of your story, I don't know why you have to engage in those horribly misleading messaging practices.
I have one of the most intelligent leading authorities on regenerative ranching in the entire United States.
Will Harris, who is the chief cowboy at White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. You may have heard of him. I've seen him on Rogan's podcast.
What's the deal with vaccines?
For years, I've vaccinated my animals with anything my drug salesman suggested I give them. And he had new products all the time. And all I cared about is how much does it cost and how much will it make me to use it. I think you're eating something that's dying, but there have been horrible unintended consequences. Big food, they kind of got it like they want it. And if all you know about your food is what you're reading on that label, you don't know too much.
What's up, you guys? Today was a super interesting conversation with Will Harris. If y'all know anything about Carnivore MD, aka Paul Salandino, Will is the head honcho, head farmer of the company that Paul Salandino works with. It's called White Oak Pastures. You've probably seen their ads all over the place, but Will is a wealth of information about farming, but particularly regenerative farming. What's really interesting about him is that he actually was an industrial farmer for 25 years. So he knows all of the insight about big food and big beef and all of the marketing and the advertising and the sales that goes into all the stuff that we have in our grocery stores and what is actually going on there. He and his company were one of the first to partner with the big dogs, Whole Foods, to actually bring them a grass-fed, grass-finished, locally raised ground beef. No longer works with them anymore, but the guy has so much insight into what's going on within these industries so that we can actually understand this matrix and how we can break in and break out of it. So if anybody's looking for a local farmer, I'm gonna add a couple links below. The first link is realmilk.com. The other one that I want to add is regenerativefarmersofamerica.com. If you guys are at all looking for farmers, you need to figure out how to find locally raised beef because you recognize the stuff in the store is probably not for you. Click those links below. It's really easy to do. And if anybody's interested in this kind of content or wanting to learn a little bit more, go ahead and subscribe or follow me on Instagram. Hope you guys like this. Let's get into it. Now, when you were in the feedlots, were you giving them, and I know this was your past and you've changed, the way you practice now, but at that time, were you pumping them with hormones to make them bigger, right? Like that's what it's doing, right?
Absolutely. I used all the tools that technology had given me to make the animals become fatter quicker. And that included hormone implants that you actually insert in the skin behind the ear, and it's slowly released into the animal system, and there are labeled instructions that tell you how often you can give it to them. I probably gave it to them more often than the directions said, but it's a drug, and there's a prescription for it. Also, subtherapeutic antibiotics. We get some of the same antibiotics that we'd use to treat the animals if they were ill. We would just give them lower levels of it all the time because somehow that causes ruminant animals to gain weight quicker. There's drugs called ionophores that affect digestion, that help them gain weight. There's also things like fly sprays and wormers and other insecticides that are products of technology that we would give the animals on a regular basis to make them gain weight quicker. It was all about making them gain weight quick.
Well, it's tough too, right? Because if the demand is there from the economy to get meat, then they got to hurry up and make meat. Now, what's interesting about all this too is whatever the animal gets injected in them, we eat as the human eating it, right? So we kind of are what we eat. That goes back to grass-fed, grass-finished. Well, I want to see if I can share this screen too, because I saw this recently and I thought this was interesting. When I was listening to Jenny, your daughter, and you talking about this on Joe Rogan recently, I was blown away. I mean, I know it, but to see it in an image like this is a bit different. What are we looking at here?
You're looking at the the American food production system. Probably the international food production system would be more accurate. But what it shows is that many brands that you see at the grocery store are owned by a very, very small number of incredibly large food companies. Since World War II, I think things really. I think the change accelerated dramatically at the end of World War II towards cheaper and cheaper and cheaper food. I think that prior to the end of World War II, how good the food was had a lot of importance, or more importance than it does today. Since that time, 70 plus years, the goal has been for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper food. And when you set aside one product attribute as pretty much all that matters, great harm comes from the other areas of impact.
What are some of the biggest, I don't know, you could say the word scandals of industrial farming and big food that you've come across?
Well, I'll answer the question, but first of all, I want to say that the fact that consumers don't know how meat is produced is very intentional. The messaging from big meat production companies is, this story. They want to show you the barnyard with the chicken and the pig and the cow, and it's not like that. It's all done in monocultural, industrial production modes these days. To answer your question about scandal, the big there are a number of them we could talk about, but the biggest scandal that's occurring right now is the rule was changed on the importation of meat. I think it was in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. But the rule was changed so that meat could be labeled as a product of the USA. Beef specifically could be labeled as a product of the USA, even though it was born, raised, and slaughtered in up to 20 other countries. The rule was changed so that if value was added here, it became a product of the USA. And today, a huge percent, I would speculate 90%, of the grass-fed beef that's marketed in this country is raised in other countries, particularly New Zealand, Australia, Uruguay, born, raised, and slaughtered in those other countries, brought here as chilled beef, but legally labeled product of the USA because value is added here. It's cut or sliced or packaged.
Now, is that like taking jobs? For the average Joe, why should they care about that?
Well, first of all, customers who choose to pay a premium to buy grass-fed beef in this country do it because of the ecological benefits. And I would suspect that most of the people in this country that want to make the land and water better would want to make the land and water better in this country first. Not to say they don't care what it looks like in Uruguay or New Zealand or Australia, but I would think that their priority would be here on the homeland. But the messaging is incredibly misleading. And
right.
I don't, if you're proud of your story, I don't know why you have to engage in those horribly misleading messaging practices.
That's such a good way to put that.
Our skins on our chickens is very yellow because we get a lot of carotene because out in the grass. Our beef fat is yellow because it's 100% grass fed and there's a lot of chlorophyll. So we just don't feel the temptation to do it.
Going to a grocery store, you mentioned Tyson being one of the leading companies, right? Like, what are we getting at a grocery store versus at a local farm? What is it if you just buy, 80-20 ground beef, just say a couple pounds of it? What is that actually? What's been the process for that product? Typically?
Well, here it's because we grind cuts of beef that would yield an 80-20 blend. in the industry, they bring there's an excess of beef fat in the marketplace because these animals are fed to an incredible level of obesity. So it yields a lot of fat. It's 50-50 fat when it's trimmed in the cutting room. And that 50% fat beef has very, very low value because there is so much of it, and it's not edible, or I guess it could be eaten, but it's not a marketable food product for people. So Big Beef has turned that into a profitable operation by buying incredibly lean beef that they export in. There are areas of the world that has animals that are very, very lean. You don't see much beef in this country that's less than 10% fat, 90% lean. But they can bring animals in that are way above 90% lean and blend that beef in with the 50% fat.
Well, I think I heard you talking somewhere about how they fatten these cattle up so much, the beef up so much, right? It's all fattened to a point that it's like these obese animals. And they do it with grain. They feed them with grain and then a bunch of hormones as well to just fatten them up. And then it's something like, I think during 2020, right, when the pandemic went down, they weren't able to, that life couldn't live without it being euthanized and then eaten. It was so unhealthy. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that is something I know a good bit about because I used to do it, is run a beef feedlot. But I did, after doing it for years, I did rethink it and decide that it was not what I wanted to do, primarily because it deprives the animal of its ability to express instinctive behavior. Most cows are born in pasture in a pretty normal living environment, but at an age, a year or whatever, they're put into confinement feedlots, and those things are incredibly crowded. There is no roaming and moving. They may be 100,000 animals on a 5, 6, 7, 800 acre feedlot. That's incredibly crowded.
They're like side to side, right?
I'm sorry.
They're like side to side, right?
They are side by side. Yeah. I mean, there's room to lie down, but there's no movement to speak of. So, and those animals are, and that's intentional because if the animals can't move around much, they can't burn calories, so it goes to fat. And those animals in confinement are fed an incredibly carbohydrate-rich diet that causes them to be unnaturally obese. And in fact, these animals will be 12, 13, 1,400 pounds by the time they're 20 months of age, which is an incredibly obese creature. It would be like a person who was 20 years old and weighed 400 pounds or 300 pounds or something.
Okay.
And it's a very cheap way of putting weight on the cattle as compared to letting them roam and graze on grass. And it makes the meat very soft. I mean, people love tender steaks, and it provides that. But it is, I think, cruel to the animals because they're not allowed to express instinctive behavior. And the part that you were talking about that I stand by, I have not done this experiment, but if you look up the life expectancy of a cow, you'll find it's about 24 years of age. That's how long they would live if they were allowed to live a healthy lifestyle. These industrially finished animals are slaughtered before they're 2 years old and weigh, again, 12, 13, 1,400 pounds. Just an incredibly obese creature that would never occur in nature.
Yeah, it's unnatural. It's you're eating something that's sick, pretty sick, right?
I think you're eating something that's dying of all of the conditions that obesity and lack of activity creates in people. I think it's got to be unhealthy.
Well, I mean, it's just naturally, like you said, things like this would never occur in nature.
It would never occur in nature.
Right. Like it would be abnormal for humans to consume it. You have to wonder what's going on. What are we eating? If we're eating that.
And to some extent, we've done that to ourselves. I mean, the world is full of there are a lot more obese people on this planet today than there was when I was a kid, or certainly when my dad was a kid.
Can you explain quickly for people who don't know, what is regenerative farming? Very simply put, what is the difference between regenerative farming and industrial farming?
My definition of regenerative farming is one that really utilizes the cycles of nature. All these unnaturally occurring hardships that we're going to have to endure have come about by breaking these cycles of nature to have this obscenely cheap food. And there will come a time when that doesn't work anymore. And I don't know when it is. I hear people say 60 years and all different numbers. I don't know that. But I do know that we are and have been living beyond our means for a long time. And Joe Rogan brought up the fact, and he's probably right, that, can we, so I can feed Bluffton, Georgia, but who's going to feed New York City? And who's going to feed San Francisco? And who's going to feed, and he's right. I don't know how that needs to look, but we certainly can't keep doing what we've been doing. I mean, there's unintended consequences that will require a payment one day.
Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think you're going to agree with me. I feel like the point of regenerative farming is to keep it local, to keep things more local than what we've been doing, which is mass producing beef, shipping it everywhere. And I know right now you're shipping, I think it's 47 states, and that's probably because you have to. There's not enough regenerative farmers right now doing it. My question to you is, with regenerative farming, is the mission to create a bunch of little regenerative farms, maybe on the edges of the cities or something like that, to support those cities? Is that the idea?
It is. I do think that because agriculture is so complex and not complicated, that scaling it up and up and up has not been the right answer. That's what we've done, but there have been horrible unintended consequences. People that are eating cheap processed food, don't want to hear that it's not good for. They don't want to hear it's not good for them, but to some extent they do. They sure don't want to hear it's not good for the earth. I mean, that's just one more thing to deal with.
I was going to pull this up too. I thought this was interesting from what y'all talked about again with what was it with Joe Rogan, but this was fascinating. It's like, this is what people eat, and they don't get it. They don't understand that it's like part of their day to day. But y'all were talking about this 5-year-old McDonald's burger that they kept around for 5 years just to see, and it was like the exact same, no mold, nothing. 5 years later. And this is like what the average person consumes. And to your point, I don't know that they care. I think the unintended consequences too of eating the product that has all the hormones and probably all the vaccines and all the crap in it, right? Like that's affecting people, whether we know it or not.
Well, and it's so delayed. If you eat poorly when you're in your 20s, and by poorly, I mean eat industrial processed food, it doesn't show up until you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s for the most part. I mean, it's very gradual, and the effect is a long way away time-wise from the cause, and that makes it hard. Even cigarette smoking in the 60s was easier to tie together. I mean, even in the 60s, 50s and 60s, everybody didn't smoke. A lot of people did, but everybody didn't. And you could see, if you looked, that more people got cancer if they smoked a lot than if they didn't. In today's case of food, until recently, everybody is eating fast food. Everybody is eating processed food. Everybody is eating whatever. It's harder to make a direct correlation.
It is. There's a lot of lag time in there. Like if you're going to the grocery store and I'm trying to pick the right product, like what would be the difference, for example, in terms of buying free range versus locally raised, pasture raised eggs, right? I think there's some falsification of the advertising going on there. What does that look like?
I don't think you're going to be able to tell what you're eating by what's on the label.
Yeah.
You can buy certified organic vegetables that are raised in a hydroponic environment. That means without soil, under artificial lights. You can buy certified organic vegetables that have never had access to the soil and soil microbes or the sun. And, it's just in my mind, it's not as good. The food labeling laws, we discussed the Product of USA a minute ago, is you just can't tell what you're getting, and that's intentional. Big food has been so intimately involved in the process, the food labeling, food registration process, that they kind of got it like they want it. And if all you know about your food is what you're reading on that label, you don't know too much. And that's one of the reasons I advocate for small, local. I think that it really is important for consumers to know a lot about their farmer, their producer. We can't spend a lot of time talking about all these words we use. We've recently started using regenerative, but that's even today, that's being taken away from us, just like organic was, just like humane was, just like natural was. I mean, we go back as far as you want to. The words get taken. The consumer is going to have, if they want to eat well and feed their families well, they're going to have to go to the trouble of knowing something about the producer of their food. And I'm really sorry about that. I wish there was a better way, because it'd make it easier on me too.
Right. Yeah, you got to meet everybody now.
Well, literally.
With vaccines, is that something that if someone has, what's the line there? What's the deal with vaccines?
So there are some vaccines in development that are very concerning. And I really don't know enough about the biochemistry of it to get into it, but I do know that it is really getting deep into nature and areas we probably ought not do it. So for years, I vaccinated my animals with anything my drug salesman suggested I give them. And he had new products all the time. And all I cared about is how much does it cost and how much will it make me to use it. And whatever it was, I used it, and I injected. I was just in the cattle business. I stuck a lot of needles in a lot of cattle, or I poured a lot of medication, a lot of feed, or a lot of medication, a lot of water, however it needed to be ingested. When I changed the way I farm in the mid-90s, I ultimately ceased to give any medication to my animals, no vaccinations whatsoever. And for years, didn't give them any vaccinations at all. 1 year, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, I lost several calves to a disease called blackleg, which is present in the soil, indigenous to this ecology, but just doesn't affect but so often. When that happened, I started back giving blackleg vaccinations, and still do, but that's all I give them. So It's wrong to say I'm not going to give any animal any vaccination, but it's also wrong to say I'm going to give the animal whatever injection makes me money.
Right. So now, you mentioned a salesman? Does the salesman just come over, just like big, pharmaceutical sales, medical sales type person? They come to your farm, or they? Yes, right.
Literally, there are. There are young men and women out there who are hired out of the ag schools to go to work for pharmaceutical companies to go visit farmers like me and convince them to buy their pharmaceuticals or their herbicide or insecticide or pesticide. Look at Bayer, Monsanto. There's multi-billion-dollar companies.
Well, we could go on and on about that one. Why don't you do vaccines though? What was the reason you were like, nah, I'm stopping? What's the cost?
Well, I did all these technologies that I gave up saved me money in the short run. But then they cost me money because I didn't get the benefit from them. There are benefits for using these products. Sadly, there are unintended consequences that come with it. And I think we've gone way too far in the biotechnologies of applying technologies for short-term gain that wind up with a long-term liability.
For anybody that's trying to learn more about this, there's a lot of people interested in farming now too. That would be a really great resource just to learn and to understand. Where else can people find you? Obviously White Oak Pastures, your website, the social media, anywhere else?
The name of the book is A Bold Return to Giving a Damn.
I just really appreciate your time, Will, and I really appreciate your work, and I look forward to getting out there and meeting you in person and shaking your hand. So thank you so much.
I appreciate your interest, and you're a very professional young lady, and it was a pleasure being with you today.